Joining our breaking news coverage of this real bombshell that the Justice Department has asked the January 6th Select Committee for transcripts is Jason Johnson, journalism and politics professor at Morgan State University, also an MSNBC contributor. Also joining us, former Republican Congressman David Jolly, the national chairman of the Serve America movement, also an MSNBC contributor. David Jolly, I'll start with you. Your reaction to something that I think some will say was a long time coming, but I think most will recognize as a pretty seismic development, and or both.
It is a seismic development. I mean, the Department of Justice Criminal Division, the criminal division charged with investigating crimes, is asking for evidence related to their investigation. And importantly, we know from the Times review of a subpoena that the criminal division is interested in the organizers and planners and financiers of the January 6th event, as well as the events before that. And why that's important is it was people close to Donald Trump that were organizing these events. Donald Trump himself issuing the invitation. And I think what this is an indication of is there are now going to be household names under the scrutiny of the Department of Justice for their role in what led to the violent events of January 6th. Recall on January 5th, Sean Hannity, one of the texts we've already seen, he texts Mark Meadows and says, "I'm very worried about the next 48 hours. Was there reason to believe that the events that the former president and his team had created, had helped organize, had helped finance through his network, was there reason to believe that there would be violence? And was the former president okay with affirming that environment on January 6th? I think that's ultimately what we're going to see Department of Justice zero in on. And then, look, politically, I think this is a reminder that the effort to compel testimony from Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan and others is not simply happening in a vacuum. We have no idea the environment that will be around those public hearings, what additional information will come out that further puts the scrutiny and spotlight on Kevin McCarthy and others, that really makes it untenable for them to take this position that they will not be responsive to this inquiry. Because I think the Department of Justice affirms this case is getting really close to the former president of the United States. And some of the people closest to him were Kevin McCarthy, Jim Jordan, and others.
Let me just follow up with you, David Jolly, because I think the testimony of Cassidy Hutchin, not a low-level aide, but a special assistant to the president. It's sort of there's an assistant to the president, deputy assistant to the president. She's sort of the next highest level in charge of legislative affairs. Her testimony is quoted in the Meadows filing, in the Meadows subpoena the report that the committee did. And she testified to knowledge from Mark Meadows' part, at least, that he was warned of the potential for violence. And then we also know for the whole duration that what the law enforcement officials defending the Capitol described as medieval hand-to-hand combat, we know Donald Trump did nothing. We know that when he laid eyes on or got ears on his own vice president and his family being evacuated from the Capitol, running, not walking, not meandering, running from that office, we know he did nothing. And we know when the calls for the National Guard came in from Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate, he did nothing. So what do you think the burden of proof is on the knowledge of or awareness of violence on the president's part, David?
I think Donald Trump knew that there would be actors embedded in the January 6th event that were prepared to commit violence. I really mean that. It is hard to suggest that all of Trump's network was involved in planning the events of January 6th as a culmination to the predicate, the big lie that had been set 6 weeks earlier, and that Donald Trump invited all these people to the event. It is nearly impossible to imagine an environment in which Donald Trump's inner circle did not know that the Proud Boys would be there, would be embedded in that situation. When you had the likes of Roger Stone and others that were descending on the Capitol in preparation for this moment on January 6th. And to the point of a criminal investigation, somebody had to pay for it, somebody had to communicate about it, somebody had to prepare the plan. And that plan included Donald Trump ultimately standing up and saying, go to the Capitol with strength, not with weakness. It is impossible from a layperson's perspective to imagine a scenario in which Donald Trump did not know that violence was a likely outcome. And fortunately, the criminal investigators and the work of the J6 committee, now in coordination, I think are ultimately going to be able to deliver that indictment at the shoes of the former president of the United States.
Wow. Jason Johnson, so much of what we think of when we think of Donald Trump is traumatic, and it is wrapped in this sort of buffoonery of his incompetence in running the government, especially at a time of a deadly pandemic. But when it came to the things that were about him and his presentation, his rallies, his song list, his hair, he was a micromanager. How do you think this investigation plays out?
Oh, first off, Nicole, I have to say I'm incredibly happy. I have been very critical of the Department of Justice for the last year, for appearing to move very slow, for not prioritizing the attack on the United States, for appearing to dawdle here and there. This is the best news that I have heard since the shaman was sent to jail. So I'm very excited about this. And I think this is a sign that not only that the Department of Justice obviously is involved, but that they have perhaps been taking this a lot more seriously than they presented. We will see how this goes. I am in complete agreement also about the guilt of Donald Trump. It is impossible to imagine that he not only didn't know that there was going to be violence, but that he didn't know who the violent actors were going to be. Of course he knew. It's impossible to think that he didn't know. This is a guy who, and what galls me about this and reminds us again of the danger, not just of Donald Trump, but the complicity of the men and women who work with him, is this is a guy who wouldn't read his daily national security briefings. They couldn't even bring it. He wouldn't bother to read those briefings, and yet he could be involved in trying to overthrow the country. He wasn't dumb. He wasn't crazy like a fox. He was just lazy and self-motivated. So I'm excited to hear that this might eventually lead to his doorstep. Now, here's the question. What finally happens and what enforcement mechanisms may occur when we finally get to the hearings? That's what I'm concerned about. Will the Republicans who have been subpoenaed still say, hey, make me, hey, I'm not going to show up one way or another? Because if the DOJ is involved in this process now, if they're asking for transcripts from these upcoming hearings, that's sort of the difference between you get in trouble with the HR at the office versus, oh, by the way, we're also calling the cops. The cops are now coming to the office, and we'll have to see if people are willing to, if you're going to ignore the office, at least listen to the cops who are coming outside the door.
And Jason, you know, when you start to ask the question of, well, who could testify to Trump's role in this, you have to start with Kevin McCarthy, who said on the tapes, yeah, he acknowledged his responsibility in the events of January 6th.
Kevin McCarthy, I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, like there's so many people. You can't imagine that in Trump world, everybody wasn't excited about this. That's the thing I think that we also have to remember. This was not something that organically came together. You know how hard it is to get a rally organized, even a regular political rally. It's not that easy to do. Trump wasn't bringing in the kind of crowds he used to. So this was something that people were talking about. Mike McCarthy knew. Members of the congressional, I mean, all the different members of Congress, his staff, Meadows, everybody knew. In fact, I think the only person who probably didn't know everything was Mike Pence. He might be the only person in Trump world that didn't know the details because his life was going to be in danger if he didn't acquiesce. So there's no way that the trail doesn't go to the president. The question is, will the Department of Justice be quick and aggressive about laying this at the foot of the president? And will they have the integrity and the commitment to the sovereignty of the United States to hold him accountable? That is the only question that has stayed with me from the beginning. But this is at least a minor step in the right direction.
For the record, Jason Johnson has never started an interview with the sentence, I am happy. So we've got that too. Jason and David are sticking around with us because when we come back, it's primary day in the key battleground state of Pennsylvania.